First, though, our top story this morning. The British Army has taken on its first uniformed clinical psychologist who will serve as a soldier while offering mental health support to his fellow servicemen. An Essex University professor says there needs to be more of officers, more members of the forces in uniform doing this sort of job, because other psychologists that the Army uses are civil servants and might not be able to relate to soldiers in the same way that a fellow serviceman can. Earlier I spoke to Jamie Hacker-Hughes, a professor in military psychology at Anglia Ruskin University in Chelmsford. He told me that it's very important for the armed forces to have a clinical psychologist who served as a soldier themselves.
Some people, soldiers, going to a Department of Mental Health, there's one up the road in Colchester, far prefer to see someone who is in uniform. They can relate much better to a person who's in uniform, someone especially who's been out to operational theatres. Others, it has to be said, actually prefer the last person they want to see is someone in uniform, but the vast majority do. So that's part of the picture. The other side of it is that if you actually need to send a psychologist out into an operational theatre, out to Afghanistan, much easier to do that if the person is in the system, wearing the uniform, with a service number, having had the training, and that person can be said, go down to Bryce Norton, get on a plane, go out to wherever. Whereas if you're a civil servant, it's all a bit more complicated.
Yeah, I speak to a soldier. Tony Gardner is all too familiar with the impact of serving overseas and the impact it can have on mental health. The former soldier from Hampshire developed post-traumatic stress disorder and has received support from veteran support charity Combat Stress. Morning to you, Tony.
Good morning.
Just tell us how you're affected by post-traumatic stress, how you were affected and how it can change your life.
So me personally, I went through a lot of different stages when I left the forces, drinking heavily, getting myself into fights, cold sweat, waking up in nightmares. Anger was a massive problem. I could get angry over, the smallest of things. And it really did affect me, trying to hold down a job, having a young family. The pressure that alone from leaving the military to adapt into a civilian culture almost is that in itself, without anything, it's quite a difficult task, regardless of how long you've served, because it's completely different to what you used to. And I joined straight from school, so the army was all that I knew from school. So it was it's very, very difficult.
Do they set you up for any of this, Tony? Do they say it's a different world when you get outside here?
No, not at all, sadly. I left, I handed my kit in, I left Northern Ireland, got on a plane, and that was pretty much it. So, there was nothing at the time. And I think, the culture then, and I'm not sure what it is now, but, you couldn't really, you wouldn't want to tell a senior member of your troop that you're suffering from X, Y, and Z, because, it's fat, you didn't want people to see it as a sign of weakness, or you weren't quite right, or, it could affect the end of your career. So, there wasn't that. It was the culture of just getting on with it. You say nothing, it's part of the job, which is okay while you're in there. But when you're out of that arena and you're not in that environment, it's a whole different ballgame.
What about the idea of having a colleague, a guy in kit that's fighting alongside you? Would you be more inclined to open up your heart and your mind to him?
Absolutely. One of the things I struggled with was people judging me. So, I tried to get help for my normal GP. And all I felt was I was being judged. So if I could have sat with someone who's sort of been in a similar environment, knows what I'm talking about instantly, without isn't going to judge me, understands, that would be fantastic. And I think there's definitely a need for it. Certainly with, we've been in Afghanistan for so long now, a totally different war, and people are going to be exposed to stuff in, day out. I think it's a fantastic idea.
Because the guys are seeing stuff that nobody should have to see and to go through, and that's got to have an effect, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It does affect you, maybe not straight away, but it does eventually catch up with you. And the fact that if you can deal with it sort of in a real time scenario or pretty much after, then you can deal with it a lot better. You can put it in your back in mind properly, or you've got an understanding of why things maybe happened to you at the time. I never did. For years it just became the norm to wake up 2 or 3 times a night shouting or screaming or not being able to sleep or things like that. If I'd have known then what I know now, it would have certainly helped me.
And you can, I mean, the psychological support, it does do the job after a while. You went through hell, but they come up with the goods, didn't they?
Absolutely. I mean, there's no magic wand at the end of it. You're still going to have problems, but there's certainly with combat stress. The biggest thing was asking for help. But when I got down to the centre in Leatherhead, you're with guys that are all in the same boat, and you suddenly feel you're not the only one.
Thank you, Tony. Tony Gardner, former soldier, developed post-traumatic stress. Well, let's speak to a doctor now that knows about the problems that military personnel can experience. Dr. Walter Buzzatelli is the Director of Medical Services at Combat Stress. That's the charity that supported Tony throughout his post-traumatic stress disorder. Morning to you, Walt.
Good morning. Hi.
Yeah, it must be hard. I'm just trying to put myself in the position here of you're a tough person. You're in the army, for goodness sake. So what are you doing saying you can't cope? And that must be the sort of problem that soldiers are faced with.
It is a big problem. It's a problem while they're in the military, as Tony said. Many guys tell me after they've left that they knew they had a problem with their mental health, and perhaps they were drinking too much, maybe they were irritable, maybe getting into fights, but they really kind of dumbed things down and pretended everything was fine. And, many people come to us many years after they've left the military on a last chance by their wife or good woman who says, please sort yourself out, otherwise I just can't cope being with you. So many guys come to us as a last chance to save a relationship or to, try and get their lives back together. And by the time they come, their mental health problems are fairly hard-boiled, but it doesn't mean that they can't be helped, and many can be helped. And usually if they engage in treatment, they do get better. So the biggest problems with mental health conditions following combat and also post-traumatic stress, because it's not the only thing that happens, are to, first of all, admit that there is a problem, secondly, to access treatment that works, and thirdly, to stay engaged in that treatment. So that's really the most important thing, is to access the correct help and to stay there, but to admit, first of all, that there is a problem.
Isn't the way ahead, perhaps, but I guess finances wouldn't allow, to assume that everybody's going to have problems and have the treatment ongoing for everybody? So, in effect, they don't have to ask for it. They're being assessed all the way through.
Well, I mean, that's one way of looking at it. But the fact is that not everybody actually develops mental health problems, even if they've been exposed to very serious combat situations. But some do. And it's very difficult to screen soldiers, for example, who don't want to tell you that they're ill. So it's really hard. So I think the military has adopted a kind of big education drive, and we're seeing perhaps some of the results of this drive now, in that the younger veterans from Afghanistan and Iraq have started to come, certainly asking for help from us a bit earlier on than the average. I mean, the average veteran waits about 14 years before they ask for help after they've left the military. So that's a very long time. Whereas the younger veterans, we've noticed, are coming on an average about 2 years after they leave the military. Having said that, the military mental health services are very good, and they would offer very good treatment interventions, providing people actually put up their hands and say, look, I do have a problem, please help me.
You're a charity, Combat Stress is a charity. Do you think the government needs to do even more to support veterans and serving officers?
Well, I think they do help. I mean, 40% of our funding is through government, the government through the NHS and the MOD, but 60% of the services we have are funded through pure charity, and without the charitable money, there's no way we could run our services. We have 14 community services across the whole country. We've got 3 residential setups that do rehabilitation and a lot of psychological programs. And yes, I think the government is trying to do more. They've set up veterans' mental health networks. In fact, there is one at North Essex, so close to where you guys are. That's an NHS service that we work very closely with all these networks that the government's setting up. But I think more needs to be done. Certainly, the NHS is technically the statutory provider responsible for treating everybody, including veterans. Unfortunately, there's a lack of expertise out there. Not many people have, first of all, served in the military. I mean, we try to employ people who have, and I have as well. I mean, I was a psychiatrist in the Air Force for 16 years. But there isn't a lot of expertise out there. So there needs to be an education drive with GPs, mental health workers especially. The MOD is trying to educate its personnel. I think that's really important. And I think, unfortunately, I have to say more money needs to be invested.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Walter Busuttil.